Hello and welcome to the Cinema ATL podcast. The Cinema ATL podcast is a weekly podcast that examines the world of entertainment through the lens of local Atlanta filmmakers. That would be us, your hosts. I'm Michael D. Friedman, and that is
Martin Kelly.
And this week we welcome you back to another edition of our Forgotten Films series. Now that October is here, it was time to do something a little bit spooky, and while this is not necessarily a horror film, the 1998 neo-noir film Dark City seems like a pretty good choice for spookiness. And we'll get into that, but first, Martin, why don't you tell our listeners how they can help the podcast out?
Well, they can help us out by listening like they do all the time, which we appreciate, but you can also enhance that help, enhance your good works by commenting, subscribing, rating it on your favorite podcast platform, and sharing it with everyone you know. And those platforms include Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, SoundCloud, Stitcher, Amazon Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and even on YouTube.
Yes, and we also want to hear from you. You can always tweet us at CinemaATL, or you can get us at our individual Twitter accounts. Mine is at CleverTransient.
And mine is at Marte_Real1.
And don't forget our Instagram, which is at CinemaATL Podcast.
Or you can always go to the website, cinemaatl.com.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us. Let's just get into our forgotten film, Dark City. All right. So Dark City, filmed in 1998. Well, released in 1998, I should say. And before I begin, we normally give a little brief synopsis, but I will want to say that if you haven't seen Dark City yet, I would actually recommend watching the director's cut of this film. I'm going to give a synopsis of the theatrical cut, but it will have some spoilers if you're going to watch the director's cut. So if you haven't seen this film and are planning on watching it, you may want to come back after you watch it if you're watching the director's cut. The theatrical release actually has some narration at the beginning that kind of spoils the director's cut with the narration at the beginning of the film. So we're going to talk about the theatrical release, and we're going to talk about that opening narration, which kind of spoils the director's cut. So you've been warned if you want to watch this for the first time fresh, and if you're watching the director's cut. So if you're still with us, I'll give you one more chance. I'm going to give you an official synopsis that doesn't spoil anything. And it is that a man struggles with memories of his past, which include a wife that he cannot remember and a nightmarish world no one ever seems to wake up from. So that's pretty ambiguous. But since we can't really talk about this film without spoilers, and if you're watching the theatrical cut, again, you don't need to worry about this because it's right in the opening narration. Here's a little bit more of an in-depth synopsis. So John Murdoch, who's played by Rufus Sewell, wakes up in a bathroom in a strange hotel, only to discover that he has lost his memory and is wanted for a series of murders. And while trying to put together the clues of his past, he discovers that a group of beings, known as the Strangers, are controlling the city, and every night at midnight, they alter the landscape and even the memories of its citizens. So they tell you that in the opening credits, so I'm not giving anything away. So Dark City, this film I really enjoy, and here's what I really like about it. It really draws influence from movies like Metropolis and Brazil, and the movie's very stylized. It's a neo-noir sci-fi film that dwells on themes of individuality, the soul, and nature versus nurture. The story is tightly packed and filled with enough action and thrills to not get bogged down in the philosophy, but it also presents a very intriguing theme about what makes us human. The visuals are just tremendous. The sets are great. The concepts are unique, especially when it comes to these mysterious beings called the Strangers and their abilities, which is what they call tuning in the world that they're in. And it's a very unique visual take that I hadn't seen before and kind of really haven't seen since. And to round it out, it's got a great cast, including Rufus Sewell, who I mentioned, William Hurt, Jennifer Connelly, Richard O'Brien, and especially Kiefer Sutherland. So Dark City, to me, is a better version of the movie it's often compared to, and the movie that came out just a year after it, The Matrix. So that's my take on Dark City. So
That's very high
it's
praise.
a
That's
bold
very
it's
high
a bold
praise.
statement, I know, but and The Matrix is a very good movie, but to me, I prefer Dark City. So
Nice, nice. Well, good. I certainly agree with you about the film being very good and very unique, and the stuff you talked about is stuff I was going to talk about. So you kind of beat me to it, but I do.
well, that's what I get
I'll
for
say
picking the film.
this
I picked the
about
film, so that's why I get the advantage, home field
exactly. You
advantage.
get to talk first. Exactly. But I will say, I'm not sure if I would go as far as you in terms of the Matrix. And part of it is because, the nature, when we talk about forgotten films, part of the aspect we'll talk about is how it, because most of these are a lot older,
Right.
that's how they get forgotten, is how they stand up. You know what I mean? And so a lot of
Hmm.
times that's part of the thought process into talking about these. And so
Right.
what I will say in that regard is that Dark City does not hold up as well for me as actually the Matrix does hold up for me. And it's
Yeah.
not it's
No.
like I said, just a bit, but I think that's why I would probably not go as far as you in that regard. But in terms of the originality of it, that's another thing. It seems wholly original, and yet it borrows so much from so many sources that
Right.
you may not even realize how many sources it borrows from, which what makes it a unique film. You know what I mean? So it is original in that regard because it borrows from everywhere to create this really singular sort of unique vision
Right.
from the filmmaker. So I'll give you that it's probably as much as the Matrix is like that in a lot of ways. This is actually even more like that. I mean, it's even more unique
Well, and
in its own right.
I will say two things about your comments. I would
Mhm.
agree that holding up, especially in the era of CGI and
Right.
technology, it does not hold a candle to the Matrix in that regard. It's definitely has some dated, CGI work, and actually the director's cut actually does improve some of that because they had a chance to go back and fix some stuff.
Hmm.
But thematically wise and plot wise, to me, that's why I feel it's better than the Matrix in that regard. And then I would also say my second point, which I'm trying to remember my second point now. I had a second
Well,
point. I
I
had a
would
second point at
like
one
while you
point.
think about your second point. I will say, yeah, I'll give you that because I do think that the thematic piece is, and they're very, they're traveling a little bit similar trajectory on the theme of,
Right,
what it means to be human, which I do believe that Dark City is a little bit more poignant in that regard. And
right.
is and both of them are really good films, and
Oh
obviously,
yeah, yeah.
you know, the Matrix is a classic for lots of people, and even me. But I do give you that I think it's a little even more poignant than the Matrix in that regard.
My second point, which I now recall, was how you were speaking about how it borrows from other things, other sources, and things like that,
Hmm.
um, which might be seen to some people as maybe a cop out, but honestly, it really fits with the story that's being told because these strangers are running these experiments on these humans, and they're taking
Right. No.
portions
No.
of
No.
their memories and building a world around it. So you can see where the neo-noir film, the influence comes in, and the fact that the city itself is a mashup of
Yes.
different
Right.
eras and
Totally.
things like
Totally.
that. So it really, in that regard, and I know you didn't say it was a bad thing, but just to kind of put an additional spin on it is I think that really fits into the theme of the film and to the whole idea of these strangers trying to experiment with the human race. So
No, absolutely. It's funny. It's funny. Yeah. It definitely wasn't a bad way I mentioned it like that. What I was just saying in terms of film wise, I think, uh, Matrix gets credit for borrowing a lot of styles and then, putting it all together into this package. But Dark City does it even more. You know what I mean? And
right,
I
right,
think,
right.
and I think you're right. Thematically, it's perfect. It's perfectly fitting for the story itself because kind of the strangers are trying to approximate our world. You know what I
Right.
mean? The strangers are trying to approximate our world so they can learn something about the human condition. And what are they going to go by? They probably are going to go by media, right? And what kind
Right.
of media did they borrow from? They borrowed from film noir. They borrowed from, Metropolis type,
Hmm.
or old classic silent films, and all kinds of different, uh, different imagery that they could have had access to from afar, right?
Right. Right.
But the point of the movie is that they could never get inside. And
Right.
even though they literally do get inside or get something inside them, it still wasn't enough for them to solve the mystery. So, yeah, I think you're right. That if thematically it does fit too. Not only is it a cool make it a cool film experience, but I think it's perfectly in line with the storytelling as well.
Yeah, and so before we jump into discussing the film even more, I want to kind of just give a rundown of the cast and crew of the film. I already mentioned the main actors of it, but the director of the film is Alex Proyas, who also this was his film he did right after he did The Crow, which is another one of I guess his major films that he's known for. He also did iRobot, and he's done other things since then. But I think The Crow and Dark City were like a back to back. Like he knocked them out of the park.
Hmm. Hmm.
The screenplay was, from an idea by Proyas, who actually wrote the first draft of the script, and then they brought in Lim Dobbs and David S. Goyer. Lim Dobbs, you might know, he did the script for The Limey and also Gotti, which wasn't really well received. But David S. Goyer is pretty well known. He did Batman Begins, and he was a story credit on the other Nolan Batman movies, as well as doing the Blade trilogy and a lot of other kind of comic book films. So
Yeah, he was the early like success story in comic book
right,
films.
right,
For a while it was like David Goyer knows how to do them and nobody else does until
right.
Marvel kind of came along.
Exactly. The cinematographer, and you have to give a shout out to the cinematography on this, because the production design and the cinematography is really what gives it its visual style. That is actually what I think is the heart of why this film connects with me so well. The cinematographer is Darius Wolski, who you might know from The Martian and Prometheus and a bunch of other films. He actually has a new film just coming out called The Last Duel. So look forward to that. The score was by Trevor Jones, who was really big, a composer around this time period. He did Last of the Mohicans, Notting Hill, some other movies, but he hasn't really done much since. But the score is actually also another part of the film that I really enjoy, and I think it's very action oriented feeling to it when it when the things ramp up, and
Right,
uh,
right.
the
And
score
and
really
it
drives
was
it forward, I think.
and it's impressive because Trevor Jones's other scores, like you mentioned, very sort of straightforward, straight
Right.
ahead type of scores, good scores. I mean, Last of the Mohicans is very good, and then a movie like Notting Hill, is very straight
Right.
ahead, kind of music. But this is very unique. This score is very unique as well. So yeah, kudos to him. And I wonder, if he just kind of just ran out of favor or something, or maybe
I don't
he
know. Yeah, he
retired
hasn't
because
really.
he had been a pop musician, I believe,
Right.
before that. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe he went back to that.
Do not know. I do not know that. So yeah, so that's the sorry, that's the basic gist of the cast and crew. There's a lot more people that worked on this film, of course, but we'd be here all day if I just read through all the IMDb credits. But I do, yeah. The production design on this is terrific, and it was all done on sets,
Hmm.
which
Hmm.
I understand. And we talked about the Matrix and the similarities between it. Is I, you know, crazily enough, the Matrix actually used some of their sets when they when they filmed the Matrix, and they filmed in Australia
Yeah,
on
yeah.
both of them. So that was kind of interesting. Um, but yeah, so let's talk about a little bit more about like the film and like what's at the heart of the film, like the plot and the
Hmm.
themes that are behind it. And like I said, just a warning, that, we are going to talk about some stuff that might be considered spoilers. We're not going to go too in depth on really like the any kind of big spoilers, but if you're trying to go in totally fresh, you might want to stop the podcast and watch the film first.
Yeah, yeah. And then you can go back and listen to the podcast again. See,
Right.
that would be good.
give us two listens on. But yeah,
Definitely, definitely. So what I wanted to talk about, you kind of kicked it off at the beginning of the show, talking about being October and something spooky. And I will say, one of the things that did hold up is how creepy it actually is.
yeah,
It's very effective in that regard because the strangers are unsettling. I mean, they
right.
really are. They
Especially
really
the
are.
kid, the
Uh
kid
huh.
stranger is really unsettling. But yeah,
Yes, and the way they move is
right,
is is kind of frightening too. The idea that they could just float around, and it was, and then again, the way they constructed them, was certainly fantastic in
and the
terms
way
of creepiness.
and the way they talk, and just their
Hmm.
names like Mister Hand and
Yes,
Mister Book and Mister Wall, like very simple
yes,
names because they just don't understand. Like they're
yes.
like,
It's
oh, we need to have a name. Let's just pick
right.
some word, and I'm that.
Right,
Right,
right. No, totally. Because they don't, again, it's all about, and in a way, if you wanted to look at it, it's all about the tragedy of not being able to accomplish their goal. You know what I mean?
right,
Because it sets it up right in the beginning that it's not that they just like doing this. Ultimately, they do have a goal. They have a
right,
goal with what they're doing. As cruel as it is, it's a noble goal in a lot of ways if you look at it from their perspective. And so the
right.
tragedy is that that they're not able to achieve it, and
Yeah,
they don't have the tools to do it.
right. So, I mean, the gist of it for those that might not have seen it and are still listening is that these strangers are aliens that have abducted these humans and put them into this city as an experiment because they're trying to figure out what makes humans, have a soul and how they live. They're trying to save their own race because their race is dying out,
Hmm.
and they're basically a hive mentality, and they're trying to figure out what makes humans individuals and how they operate. And they do this by taking the people of the city and tweaking it and trying to see how they react. And the question is whether, like, if you tell a person that they are a serial killer, will they will they go
Continue,
on
yeah.
those instincts? Like, because if you implant these memories of them being a serial killer, will they continue on that path, or will they remain true to their inner being? Right.
Right, right,
So it's really
right.
trying to figure out like how memories work and how they affect the
Hmm.
soul of a human there. So that's what they're trying to figure out. So they're doing these experiments, and like Martin said, they're not a villain in the fact that they're trying to do evil. They're trying to figure out like how they can survive by studying another race.
But
Um,
they do enough. They do enough evil
oh,
stuff.
they do. I mean, they are evil. They are the bad guys. But yeah,
But yeah, no, totally. But again, I can't emphasize enough how creepy they really are, and it's unusual for a film
yeah.
to really be able to bring out that kind of
Especially
unsettling
especially
feeling.
Richard O'Brien as Mr. Hand. He's really
Oh yeah, yeah.
really creepy, and you might know him from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Um, but yeah, he's like super creepy.
No, totally. And I don't think you'll know him from that if you see this, because you'll know him from this only because he's so uniquely, unsettling in my opinion. But again, the other piece of it is the mission itself. Is messing with people's lives, and then the performances from the human characters were really interesting too.
Right.
And like for instance, the policeman. And first of all, I love that it was neo-noir because I this is like some of my favorite costumes is like the noir. And then they've got all the great hats and the great
Right.
jackets and things like that. But it's like, again, we talk a little bit about the influences of the film are really sort of the influences of the strangers in setting up these experiments because
Right.
William Hurt is almost just like this kind of weird uh, this weird copy of a policeman, right?
Right. Right.
An inspector, like he was. They watched one episode of a detective story from the 40s or 50s and said, okay, here's what it has to be. And then even William Hurt doesn't quite understand why he does what he does. And so it's
Right.
like that performance was so interesting. It's like he's like clueless, and yet he's the lead detective, you know what I mean, in the
Yeah.
city.
I love
So
that. I love his performance in it. It's very understated, but it's very layered at the same time. Like you
right,
said, it's a guy who's in this situation who probably shouldn't have been in this situation. He was probably, somebody completely different before they implanted these memories of him being a police detective. So, and
right,
they allude
right,
to it. He's got like this accordion that he plays, and he's very mellow, and like so you think there's something like little more there, and that's really what that's what the character is. There's something more under that surface than just that detective.
totally, totally. And yeah, I mean, again, it's really interesting how it goes. And then I like also she's not in the movie as much as you would think, because at the time she was a very very big star and on the rise, and certainly when they promoted the film, it was a big part of it.
Right.
Her role is a little bit smaller, but it's so important. The Jennifer Connelly character,
Right.
and she's got the most important moment in the whole film, because it's the code that can't be cracked.
Right.
Is in the middle when they have that scene where Murdoch is he's figured it out, and yet she still you know embodies the truth of the human soul, right? Even though he's questioning everything, she doesn't question the one thing that makes the
Right.
humans above the strangers, in terms of being soulful creatures,
Right. Right. Definitely. And yeah, it's just like you said. I think the role is small, but she does bring a very important gravitas to it. And she's excellent in it. I think the acting in this is really just terrific. And I did want to go back to the William Hurt character, which I think one of the things that you talked about, like borrowing from other things. His name is Inspector Bumstead, and he
Yeah.
was named after a very famous art director and production designer from the the film noir era.
Yes.
He's
Yes.
named after Henry Bumstead, who was a a
Yeah.
production
He
designer
was
on a
he
bunch
was
of RKO
the
pictures and
guy.
stuff like that.
He
Yeah,
was pretty much the guy on those.
right.
Yeah, for
And
sure.
then they also Keith Sutherland's character, Doctor Schreiber, is actually named after a real doctor who had
Yes.
done like experiments on this type of
Hmm.
thing. So I
Well,
really like.
he actually influenced modern psychology,
Right.
because he actually had um, schizophrenia,
Hmm.
and he wrote about his experiences. The doctor that the character's named after,
Right.
he wrote about his experiences, and that influenced the the leaders in the psychology movement, to explore the nature of memory and things of things that affect the human mind. So yeah, that was a nice homage. And then of course Kiefer does an homage to I think is what he's doing. He does an homage to one of the great film noir villains in cinema. Uh, what's man? I'm blanking on his name now, but
Yeah,
you know
I
who
know
I'm
what you're
talking about,
talking
right?
about, but yeah, I like the way he like carries himself and speaks in the very halting tones, and
Yes,
it's
yes,
really an interesting choice, and I think it works really well. Um, and it actually kind of makes you feel sympathy for his character because he's gone through a lot. There's actually a scene in the director's cut that kind of reveals a little bit more about what happened to him before this these series of events takes place, and it kind of makes him a little bit more sympathetic character. And so I really like the choices that he made as an actor, and and then Rufus Sewell as well was like really really solid. Like I mean, there's nothing you can. It's funny because he kind of says that he wishes he did a better job on it, but I think he's perfectly fine in the role. and it always kind of made me wonder like why he hasn't become a bigger star. He's done stuff. He's done like he did A Knight's Tale, and he was on the Man in the High Castle series, and I mean he's working constantly, but he's just like one of those guys that I thought could have been a bigger star than he became.
No, I think that's true. I mean, who knows? Who knows?
Right,
James Cagney. That's who
James
I'm
Cagney.
thinking
There,
of
yeah, yeah, yeah.
from the homage I believe that Kiefer's doing.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right
He
about
also kind
Rufus.
of has, just to go back to Kiefer. He also kind of has a little bit of the Frankenstein's assistant.
Yes,
You know,
Renfeld,
yeah.
right?
No, that's the Dracula's assistant.
Oh, my bad.
Frankenstein's assistant, like
Igor.
Igor, yeah, kind of like
Okay.
that. You know what I
Yes.
mean? Like it's kind of
Yes.
it's subtle. It's not as over the top as Igor, but you can kind of
Right.
feel
Right.
like
Right.
that's where you get it from, and it makes sense because he's the assistant to the strangers.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
but yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
I digress.
Again, yeah. Again, all unique performances and unique characters. So I'll say this about the screenplay. You mentioned Lim Dobbs, of course, and I think part of why Lim Dobbs was brought on is he actually wrote the screenplay to Kafka too, which
Mm-hmm.
this borrows a lot from. That the Kafka is Kafka-esque in
It
certain ways
is
too.
Kafka-esque a little bit, yeah.
So yeah, I mean it's all these again all these myriad of influences get put together into this story that's really about, hey, who are we,
Right,
and what are we, and the Rufus Sewell character represents the actual us, right, the humans that actually can be something uniquely special, right,
right,
and not sort of programmed. You know what I mean? I think the what everything else is going on in this world, and some people have broken out of it subtly. Like there's another police detective group,
right, right,
but he broke out in a bad way, and whereas Rufus Sewell was able to sort of be that Neo, so to speak,
right,
and really break out of this confinement that they were put in, that the humans were put in,
right,
and and rise above that. And so I think that was that's at the heart of this, and it just gives you kind of hope that that's true.
right,
That we can be human, and rise above all this manipulation that's going on. In the world in so many different ways, is that we're trying to be programmed by everything around us,
right,
but
right,
I think we can still be human. And I think this film
right.
really hammers that point home, is that we can actually defeat those forces of manipulation.
I want to. I know we are already getting close to the time on our episode, and it feels like we just
Yeah,
started. But there's a
I
lot you could
know.
talk about on this movie. But I did want to mention, we're speaking about characters right now, but then I want to talk about another part of the film, which almost is a character in its own, and that is the city itself.
Absolutely,
And
yeah.
the way that they've designed the city, and the way that the city acts like almost another character in the film. The fact that the strangers can tune the city and have it change, it really feels like almost claustrophobic in a way.
Hmm.
And then just the nature of it, how it's a circle, and they allude to it like when Kiefer Sutherland's character is doing a test on a rat in the maze, and it's like basically the city that they're in,
Hmm. Hmm.
with no way out, and this quest to get to this mythical place called Shell Beach is like the main driving force of the character once they realize what's going on, um, and the fact that everything's moving and nobody remembers where it is, and the city's always bathed in darkness, and there's a reason for
Hmm.
that, and I'm not going to spoil the reason, like why nobody ever can remember the daytime, um, but that all adds to this air of really, like you said, creepiness to it. It's
Hmm.
like you
Oh
are
yeah.
trapped in this world with them, and it's really just, I don't know. It was amazing. The visuals are like I talked about, like how it hadn't really been done before, and it hasn't really been done since. There's been little bits of it I think this
Mhm.
is like the prelude to Inception or Doctor Strange, and like how they
Yes.
manipulate the worlds. But in this case, it's like real and physical, and
Right.
the way they produce it and how it spins up from the ground, and there's like this rotation to it. It's just a unique way to look at it, and I really appreciated how they came up with that design. And I think that's one of the things that make this film, while it does borrow from a lot of stuff, makes it truly original.
No, totally. I agree with that. That's one of the best parts of it is the unique way that they're able to tune the city and bend these materials to their will and the way it happens is really cool. And you're right. I agree. It is a precursor to things like Inception and Doctor Strange. So, um, but they do theirs in a different way. But
Right,
this one is done so, like you mentioned, very physically. You know what I
right.
mean? Instead of metaphysically, like I think the others are done.
And I mean, within the world physically, and then also the way they did it is very fit. They used a lot of sets and models and things to
Hmm.
do
Hmm.
these things, and it gives it a unique look. And I mentioned, the effects compared to like the Matrix are nowhere near that level, but it's not that. That part of it still works. That part of it
Right. No,
still
no,
looks
totally. Yeah.
great. It's more of the
Right.
other effects that you
Yeah.
see that kind of take you out of the moment, especially at the big fight at the
Yeah.
end
Yeah.
and stuff like that. But to me, that those are minor
I
in
mean,
comparison,
exactly.
right?
And anybody, here's something, I guess, a note to everybody who is going to watch one of these older films, especially you young people who are going to go watch one of these older films that we're talking about. You have to respect that the technology to do effects had not advanced to where it is today. So
Right,
you're going to have to suspend that critical, impulse to say that it doesn't look cool because it did look cool at the time, honestly.
right, right.
And you just have to you know make make that mental adjustment and let it go and just worry about the story. But yeah, to your point, Mike, the stuff with the city itself, nothing wrong with that with those effects. Those were really really cool.
One of the things I wanted to mention about the city and about how we talked about how these strangers don't really understand humanity or just even the world that they're recreating this world for these humans, but they have never been to our world.
Hmm.
Um, One of the things I thought was a little subtle thing that was really cool that I didn't really notice until watching it again is that there's no like the only thing in the whole city that is like marketing related is Shell Beach. All the other stuff is very it's like the characters themselves, Mr. Hand, Mr. Wall. He goes to the automat and it's called automat. There's a
Yeah,
barbershop, it's
yeah,
barbershop. It's the
exactly,
theater is a theater.
exactly.
It's like it, it's subtle, but it's very cool how they did that, right?
Right. It's basically it is what it is, and they're like,
Right,
well, we have to have a theater, so okay, we'll call it the theater,
right,
or we have to have a barbershop, well, we'll call it the barbershop, and not that's again a testament to the fact that they aren't thinking the way we do. They're not
right.
as creative as we are. You know what I mean? In a lot of ways, because even in the 40s, you know, the barbershop probably had a cool name,
Right,
or
right.
the theater had a different name, and
Yeah.
that kind of thing. So it's funny that you mentioned that, but again, goes back to that same theme: is that they are approximating it without the in depth knowledge to be able to really make it come to life.
It's one of the reasons why I recommend the director's cut over the theatrical. Now, I saw the theatrical. I saw it in the theater when it came out. So it's
Hmm.
what I know. So it's hard for somebody who knows what's going on to go back and look at it with fresh eyes with the director's cut. But the director's cut kind of leaves you more in the dark about what's going on, and these little clues are ways to like kind of get you unsettled, and
Right,
for you
right.
to understand that something here is not quite right. um, and I think that
Yeah,
adds to the feel of the film. And like I said, I've never been able, I will never be able to see it with fresh eyes, but to me, I feel like the director's cut would be a better introduction to this film
I,
than
I
the
think I
theatrical.
think you're right. I think you're right. And again, I'm in the same boat. I saw the theatrical version too. And so I would never even I haven't seen the director's cut yet, but I would never get to see it from that fresh perspective. But I bet
Right.
that is something to see. So yeah, if you haven't seen it, then I'd go for the director's cut.
Although we
And
just ruined it for you if you haven't seen it and you're listening to this part, but
right. But I think you can still appreciate the film.
right, right,
We're not going to cover it so in depth that you can't appreciate it still.
right.
But
No, there's
if
still we're still not spoiling like a lot of
right,
the major stuff, but yeah,
right, but then that would be something to see is the exploration of the director's cut, where it's even more of an experience probably for the
right.
audience. You know,
I feel like it is. I know that the studio had them add the narration to the beginning because they didn't feel like the audience would get it.
right,
So
right.
um,
And you know what? I mean, honestly, they may have made the right call. You know,
right,
I think the movie struggled anyway. You know, unfortunately, which is why
right,
it's now a forgotten film, especially now forgotten after Matrix was such a hit. You know what I mean? I think
right.
that also adds to the fact that it's forgotten. Is that not only couldn't this become a cult classic because they already had the replacement the next year that was wildly successful, but I think they may have been onto something because it's not an easy film. You know, there's even with the narration at the beginning, there's still some parts of it that are a bit confusing. You know what I
Right.
mean? And so I could see why they would make that kind of decision. You
Yeah,
know, but
it is a
at the same
challenging
time,
film. Yes, yes.
mhm, it's
I
challenging.
agree.
So you know, I don't fault them for doing that. Although I do think you're probably right, and the director's cut is probably a better way to experience the film.
Well, I mean, if you're going to seek out this film now,
Hmm.
then he definitely is because this is the type of movie that you would be into. They were trying to appeal to the mass audience back when the theatrical cut was coming in,
Right,
and
right.
you know you can say what you will. Is like, do you go for the mass audience or do you go for the people who are going to get your film? You know, you could go either way. You know, of course, studios are in it for the money, and of course, they're going to want it
Exactly.
to appeal to the widest audience as possible. But you know, like unfortunately, yeah, Dark City never really had a chance. It released like I think only a couple weeks after Titanic, when everybody like was going to
Hmm.
Titanic, and that's all, dominating the box office. And then, like you said, the next year, very next year, The Matrix comes out and it's exploring the same themes. I mean, it really is like we don't have time to talk about like all the similarities between the two, but you talked about like Rufus Sewell being kind of the Neo character, and then they're
Hmm.
in this
Hmm.
world where they're being controlled by an outside force, and they're trapped, and
Yep.
they
Hmm.
can't get
Hmm.
out, and it's very there's some beats that are just very similar to the Matrix in there.
Totally. Totally. So you know, if some a conspiracy theorist would say that Alex Proyas stole the same idea that the Wachowskis did,
Yeah, exactly.
which that story that it was stolen
Right.
from a Gloria something or other. I forget her name,
Everything's stolen. Um,
but no, yeah,
and
it's
this does lend credence to the flat Earth theory. I will say that.
don't start that. Now we're really going to get banned.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to talk about this film. If you want to continue the conversation, I think I would love to like hear people's input on what they
Definitely.
feel about this film. We'd love to keep the conversation going. If you want to, comment on Instagram, Twitter, on our website, whatever, we'd really love to hear what you have to say. But I think we really kind of need to wrap it up because we're already
Yeah, totally, totally.
at our time, at our allotted time. But if you ask me, this is definitely worth seeking out. It's very just unfortunately, it's not streaming anywhere right now. So you'd have to pay the rental to see it, or get the DVD, Blu-ray, or whatever. But I think it is worth your time.
Hmm. Hmm. I agree. I agree.
Well, all right. That about does it for this week's episode. Thanks again for listening. We also want to thank Eureka Failure for providing the music for us as they do each and every week. And if you are listening to this podcast on October 8th, you need to check out Eureka Failure tonight at the Star Bar. They're doing a show, so check them out. And then also, we just want to ask you to please share and comment and subscribe and all those things. It really helps us out. But before we go, Martin, what are your words of wisdom for this week?
Well, um, in line with the theme a little bit, I'm going to take a quote from Helen Keller, who really kind of knew what it was to be a human, even despite all her disabilities and challenges. But here's a quote that she said was, "Your success and happiness lie in you." And I think that's something that it lies within all of us. All of us humans have that capacity within us to be successful and to be happy and to be of service to others. And so I think, that's part of what being human is. And so hopefully we can all be more human.
Yeah, I agree. Martin, you're making it difficult for me to make jokes about your quotes when I agree with them. But yeah, there we go. I'm not going to make a joke. Very good. Your very good thoughts. And yeah, like I think you hit the nail on the head. And if you watch Dark City, you'll probably appreciate that quote even more. All right. Well, that's it for this week. We'll see you again next time on the Cinema ATL podcast. Bye.